down. Thomas Hearns is an open book for Ray Leonard. Backs up against the ropes.
This is one of the most unusual calls by a referee in the history of the sport.
The first loss.
A tremendous victory. Leonard fighting off the ropes.
It happened. It happened. An uppercut by Douglas. Down goes Tyson.
Hooks in right hand shot.
Excellent. Knocks out by Tyson.
Slumps to the canvas.
The champion struggles to stay on his feet.
How do you like it? How do you like it?
Welcome as always, fight fans, to another episode of Legendary Night with me, your host Sean Bastow, shortly to be joined by Johnston Brown, and this episode is the tale of Marvelous Marvin Hagler versus Thomas the Hitman Hearns. This is the fight, or as commonly known as the war. Before we get into this episode, please go and check us out on social media at Legend Night Pod on Twitter and BTR Boxing Podcast Facebook page. If you've not already subscribed to the podcast, you can do so by checking us out on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or Spotify or Spreaker or Stitcher. Any of the available podcasting apps out there, we are on there. So, this is the fight and this is the war. This is 8 minutes of hell. This is the tale of Marvin Hagler and Tommy Hearns. It's 8 minutes. 8 minutes of pure ferociousness. 8 minutes of back and forth action. This is the tale of Marvin Hagler versus Tommy Hearns from 1985. Johnston, an absolute brilliant fight to be talking about for this Legendary Nights episode, and one that has always been one of them fights where it's a go-to fight. When I ask people what would they go and watch on YouTube, this is definitely up there as one of them fights that you would click in and go, right, I'm going to go and watch this fight now. This is an amazing fight.
It really is, and as you say, it is just a magnificent 8 minutes of boxing. It's just stunning. I mean, you say that about sort of going onto YouTube and have a look at it. It was when I was, God knows now, probably about 20 years ago, someone told me that I need to watch Hagler Hearns, and I knew who Hagler was. I weren't too familiar with Hearns, to be honest with you, and I remember going and sort of, I think it was a DVD, or it may have even been something on like a Sky or cable or some network I was watching it on, but either way, I was amazed. My mouth was open for literally those whole 8 minutes, and I was absolutely just in awe of what I was watching, and still to this day, 20 years on, I can't really pick a better 3 rounds of action, to be honest with you. It's just stunning.
Absolutely stunning, brilliant fight, and I'm really excited to go through this because there's so many fact bombs to bring to you in this episode that maybe anyone that's watched that fight might not have even known about in this particular build up to the fight. So I'm really excited to go through and sort of break this stuff down and talk about it, because there's stuff that I didn't even know about, and it's really good when you sort of start to break things down a little bit more with the build-up, because you think of the fight and you just think of the 8 minutes of ferociousness and you know, the hell that they both went through in them 8 minutes, and then you think about the aftermath and all the rest of it, but then you don't really think about everything else that led to this fight, especially if you was young or not even born in that particular era when this fight happened. This really gives you a bit of bigger insight into what this fight meant and how this fight was built. So as always, we're going to cover it off. We're going to go into the careers of both of them in a little bit of context, and then we'll obviously go into the build-up, the fight, and then the aftermath, what it meant to boxing and what it meant to both of these men. So let's begin then with Marvelous Marvin Hagler. We have done a career profile on Marvin Hagler, so if you do want to go and listen to that, you can listen to it on the Career Profiles podcast feed. Go and check that out, and it's on Twitter at career_profiles. We do a full deep dive into the career of Marvin, so we're going to really touch on a few of the fights in the lead up to the Tommy Hearns fight, of course. So he picked up the world titles for the first time in 1980. That was the big night for Marvin Hagler. That's when he got the world titles. That's when he got the recognition that he deserved. He did previously attempt to get the world titles, but got a draw against Vito Antuofermo, then gets the win over Alan Minter, but the celebrations were cut short against Alan Minter because it was over here in London, and he was getting bottles, and he was getting all sorts of crap thrown at him, so they literally escorted him out of the ring, and he never got the opportunity to actually celebrate becoming a world champion.
Now, the referee, Barisan, has the corner man. The fight stopped. It's over that quickly. The middleweight champion of the world is Marvin Hagler. That quickly, he fought his fight. When Midget tried to mix it up, he had no chance at all. Now bottles are being thrown into the ring, and beer cans, and the corner people are trying to protect Marvin Hagler, the British fans, and that's in accordance with fan behavior these days. Tragically, the British fans are upset that the fight was stopped.
No, he didn't. It was a bit of a sour point for Haggler after, fighting for so long. I mean, he was 49-2-2 going into the Alimenta fight. And he had, as you say, rightly or wrongly, I still believe he beat Vito Altaferro. I still think he deserved it. He got the draw. But, as you say, 27th of September 1980 at Wembley Arena, he defeated Alimenta, and it was awful. I mean, all the bottles come flying in, and the police are literally escorting them out. So, is his 50th win, and he was finally the middleweight champion of the world, and deservedly so. And I mean, as you say, we've already been through his career. It took him a while to get there, but winning the WBA, WBC, the ring, and the lineal middleweight titles that night, and he was superb against Minter.
And I think he moved on in his career after a couple of defences throughout 1982 and 1983. We get to the back end of 1983, and we get to the 10th of November, and a particular fight that we wanted to mention was the fight against Roberto Duran. So this was obviously an interesting fight because Duran had obviously moved up throughout the weights. Another guy we've done a career profile on, you can go and check out on that feed. We've talked about the way Duran had moved up through the weights, so he'd eventually come up to the middleweight division to challenge Marvin Hagler for all them titles, and lo and behold, he actually went the distance with Marvin Hagler. One of the first people to actually go out there and give Marvin Hagler a really, really tough fight. It wouldn't be the first Marvin Hagler tough fight, but this was one of them that he was involved in, where you expected maybe to blow Duran out of the water, given the weight and the height difference in this particular fight. But yeah, Roberto Duran managed to grind his way through that fight and give Hagler some problems in that fight, and managed to respectfully get through the fight, 15 rounds. Hagler wins, gets a unanimous decision, defends his titles, but I think both walked away with great respect for each other after that.
Certainly did, and Roberto Duran, as you say, moving through the weights, fighting a legitimate middleweight in Marvin Hagler, a very solid fighter, and people say that Hagler probably give Duran a little bit too much respect, where when he was in the incentive, he decided to not follow through with it, maybe because he was more worried about what Duran was going to come back with, and it was very tight up until even the 13th, I believe the 13th round, it was when Duran was ahead by 1 point on two of the judges' scorecards. So, Hagler had to win those last two rounds with a swollen left eye and a cut, and he managed to win the last two rounds, which won him the fight. And generally, people sort of, I suppose, who came out of it probably with most respect, probably Roberto Duran, because of the fact that, we're not going to touch too much on it, but Hearns had literally demolished Duran. I think it might have been after, actually, but even still, the fact that Hagler had gone the distance with Duran, whereas Hearns didn't, I think this is where a lot of the moving into the fight and the build-up for it, that's where a lot of the tensions were coming from Hearns' perspective, in terms of, I think it was 84, I think it was, maybe a year later that he gets rid of Duran. So it's interesting to see Duran do that against Hagler. And then obviously, what Hearns goes on and does, which we'll speak about later.
Going into another fight of Hagler's career, which I wanted to touch on, is Juan Domingo Roldan. So that particular fight was where Marvin Hagler supposedly and arguably got knocked down, which he always adamantly and vehemently denies was a slip. And when you watch the footage back, it does look like a little bit of a slip, but did a punch cause it? Well, go and check it out and have a look and let us know, because it's a very difficult one to go off, really. You can argue both ways with this particular one, but that was the first time and only time in his career that he'd ever actually touched the canvas. So that is an interesting one to go and look back on. He did obviously eventually go on to stop Roldan to defend his titles, and then he'd have one more title defence against Mustafa Hamsho before the fight was announced in late 1984, which we'll go on to in the build-up. So you're going back to Thomas Hearns then, and Thomas Hearns' career in the lead-up to this. Obviously, Thomas Hearns started his career through the lower weights. Again, another guy who's a career profile has been done on. So again, go and check that out and look at the full career of Thomas Hearns through our Career Profiles podcast. So Thomas Hearns' career obviously is different because he came up through the welterweight division and he came up having fights with Sugar Ray Leonard. So he'd already had his defining night. He might have been on the wrong end of the result in that defining night, but it was a very, very good fight, and he was beating Sugar Ray Leonard in 1981 up until he got stopped late in the fight. So that was his big night, really, where he came on from. And then from there, he'd go on, obviously, to pick up the light middleweight or super welterweight titles. And then, whilst he was the super welterweight champion, he decided then to move up to middleweight to take on Marvin Hagler. And that really sort of sums up Thomas Hearns. I mean, you can look at a couple of notable wins on there that we touched on earlier. The Roberto Duran was one of them, but the Wilfred Benitez victory as well was another one. So two brilliant names on his record there. But the Duran one in particular, for this legendary night, is the one that I think the comparisons were made from, as you rightly pointed out. So you look at the fact that in 1983, marvellous Marvin Hagler goes the distance, losing on the cards at one point of the fight, goes in and eventually grinds out that victory over Duran. A year later, Roberto Duran gets demolished in 2 rounds by Tommy Hearns. Absolutely gets flat out on the floor, face down.
Good right hand by Duran, however. Duran did get that punch in, one to the body.
Nice
right hand by Tommy Hearns, and he's all over Duran. He is all over him. Duran barely able to defend himself, grabs and holds.
He's out.
The legs are gone. Duran is hurt. He's wobbly. Tommy hits him with the right hand.
Vicious
Another
right hand.
I think this fight is very close to being over. A left hand. Duran fights off the ropes.
Oh, he's out.
He was out before he hit the canvas.
At a minute 58,
That's it.
Burns
Stop
hit
the
right
fight.
hand.
Stop the fight.
And
It's
referee Carlos Padilla
Out before he hit the
says,
canvas.
that's all. This fight is over.
And yeah, you've got this comparison of, well, Tommy Hearns move up. Can he actually cause Marvin Hagler some problems? Will he be able to cause him some problems? And I think it's really interesting because the build-up is probably the best part, as well as the fight, of the whole event. The build-up itself kind of made the event for me, looking back on everything. I think if I was a boxing fan in 1984, 1985, I think the way they did go on to actually sell the fight, you know, it really sort of got me engaged in it. I was looking back for all the videos and the interviews and the footage of it, and it's just really good. It's like, it's what you like about a fight. It's what makes you excited about a fight. So that leads us on nicely then. The build-up of the fight, this is what we want to touch on predominantly for the episode, because there's so many different stories to talk about in this one. So, as I said, the build-up started to begin in late 1984, but originally, this fight was actually supposed to happen in 1982.
I feel as though that I took a lot out of Roberto Duran. He was only a shell of the fighter that when I fought him. And not to take anything away from Tommy, because that's the way to go in and get the job done. But I tell you, the biggest fight that I've been waiting for, and that's with Sugar Ray Leonard. Now that he's gone out of the game, now I only have one other thing to do, and that's to fight Thomas Hearns. And I'm planning on breaking every bone in his body.
You sound like you got a vendetta against Thomas. Are you still upset about the fact that first fight that you had going was
Exactly. I trained very hard for that. I'm still a little disappointed about it. But that's great, because that's the name of the game. This is a money opportunity sport. And I think that Thomas is a great fighter, not to take anything away from him. But it's due to happen, because we're getting closer every day.
Thomas, it sounds like he's ready.
Yeah, well, it sounds like
I'm still shaking, Tommy. I'm still shaking.
After watching this fight, watching the replay of this fight, this Duran Hearns fight, Marvin, I know you're definitely scared. I can see you shaking. You're shaking like a leaf on a tree right now. And just a matter of time before you fall.
Oh, yeah. Let me tell you, you're never going to make it to the light heavyweight, because first you have to get through me.
That'll be an easy test.
Oh, okay. Action. Put the name on the contract.
I'd like to promote this.
Contracts don't mean anything anymore.
You're ready to go? What about this fall, Marvin? Any tax problems, or can you go again this year?
Well, right now, what we're trying to do is I'm spending a little time with my family and stuff. And,
spend a lot of time, Marvin.
Listen. And also to take care of one, which is #1 contender, Mustafa Hamsho, and then come after Thomas Hearns.
You do want to fight Hamsho first. I want to get that straight.
Yeah, I believe, because he is the #1 contender, and there is a mandatory defense there.
Now, does that mean you would put Hearns off until early next year? Marvelous. How would you set that up?
Well, we try not to, because Tommy don't really scare me at all. And I feel as though they have the stuff to beat him. Duran stood too upright and really didn't put the pressure on Tommy the way you should have to fight Tommy.
All right, Marvelous. Good luck to you.
Thank you very much.
All right, and Thomas, good luck to you. I know it's just a matter of time because that is the fight that the fans want to see. So good luck to both of you.
Yes, it was supposed to happen 3 years earlier. So, you know, with Leonard heading towards retirement back in '82 and Duran still tainted with the no mass fight, Hagler and Hearns were basically two marquee boxers in the sport at the time, and a match-up and a fight, it seemed inevitable. So by sort of earlier in 1982, Bob Arum, Hagler's lawyer Steve Wainwright, and Emmanuel Stewart, who of course was the legendary Emmanuel Stewart, who was in Hearns' corner for his whole career, had they entered into a unique three-fight contract pitting Hagler against a trio of middleweights from Stewart's Kronk Gym. So under the terms of the agreement, Hagler would have to fight in order Mikey Goodwin, William Lee, and then Hearns. But what happened was Goodwin actually broke his hand in training, so therefore Lee was pushed in as a bit of a late replacement, and you know wasn't quite ready for Hagler, and that was clear to see because Hagler absolutely dispatched him within a minute, and the caveman went back into his little cave, and that was the end of that. And then Goodwin was still actually injured, so Hagler Hearns was scheduled to fight on the 24th of May, 1982, in Windsor, Ontario, which is just across the river from Detroit. So, you know, there was a dispute as well with subscriptions. I think HBO were involved, and I believe there was a contract with Top Rank, and it had to be on HBO, and there was this pending legal case. Basically, during that time, it was where Hearns broke his pinky finger, and you know the famous quote with Haggler sort of saying, you know, I'd have cut it off if I had to, if it was me. The fight ended up getting cancelled. So 3 years before, it was all ready. Dates were set. I believe there actually posters made, tickets were printed. It was all ready to go. The injury to Hearns stalled it, and then eventually they called it and they said, you know what, let's leave it and we'll wait for another time. And obviously, it went to 1985. So, yeah, that was the end of that. 3 years before. Looked like it was going to happen, didn't.
Once we can get Marvin to watch the left jab, get his mind on the left hand, then there will be no problem with getting other shots off.
Hearns' best defense is his offense, because that's the only way that he knows how to fight. In my way, I have to make my defense my best offense. So, and though that I have both ways, because once I get him in trouble, I can change it around. Thomas don't have that ability.
I'm here to show the world that I have the ability to punch and power, to get in there and knock out middleweights, light heavyweights, whatever, welterweights, all the way up to the lightweight division. I have that power.
I have my mind focused on one thing, and that's to destroy him. That is to knock him out. If I have the opportunity, if it's there, I'm going to take it.
I think that this fight here will put me in the position to make greatness and put me one step closer to greatness, and which is to win the 4 titles.
That's what I feel. War. That's what's on my mind.
I don't see the fight going 12 rounds.
I've been feeding the faith, and I've been starving the doubt. So there's no doubt in my mind that I can't win this fight, or that I won't knock Thomas Hearns out.
Well, it was good for them that it made 1985, because just 3 years later, it'd actually become a much more financially viable fight, because both of these men would make a lot more money from it happening in 1985. So the guaranteed purses for overall for the actual fight was 10.5 million minimum. And basically, they'd get a good percentage each. So I think it was around about 50-50 on this. We've spoke about 50-50 purse fights before in previous episodes. I mean, it's not often you see that in this day and age of boxing. But back then, both of them, in their own respective rights, were the draw. Because you had the undisputed middleweight champion, and you had the super welterweight champion, the WBC super welterweight champion. So these guys were big marquee names, as you pointed out a little bit earlier. So they were going to make a hell of a lot of money. So when the fight was officially announced in 1984, the first press conference took place, and both of them, full of smiles, really happy. And it's quite evident by looking at them that the money was speaking here. Not only the fact that they were going to get the fight, but the money was speaking. And in January and February of 1985, Marvin Hagler, Tommy Hearns, and Bob Arum embarked on the Magical Mystery Tour, as they called it, in order to sell the fight. So they went on to visit 22 cities in separate corporate jets. So this was a big way of them promoting the fight. And what was interesting about that was the fact that there was certain countries and certain cities that did go in there. And I think when you look back on the footage of both men's careers throughout the whole of their careers, what you'll notice for me is that Tommy Hearns weren't really the biggest talker throughout most of his career. Marvin Hagler wasn't really much of a talker either. So you wasn't really going to get an exciting press conference. And Tommy Hearns was basically told, look, you're going to have to go out there and sell this fight. You're going to have to really push this to the casual audience. We need to sell these tickets. So you see Tommy Hearns in press conferences giving it the big I am. A lot more talkative. He wasn't very comfortable with doing that either. However, it was absolutely pertinent to this fight, getting big mega money out of it and big TV recipients, I think, by going out there and selling it. And that's exactly what they did. So then this Magical Mystery Tour brought up a few interesting stories. And there was one particular that really I found absolutely amusing. And it was the one about the corporate jets.
Yeah. So Caesars owned one of the planes, which was a state-of-the-art Gulfstream G2. So I'm not too savvy with planes. I'm not, for me, it's just a jet. I'm guessing it's a nice big jet. That's about what I can tell you. So Bob Arum then leased the second jet, which was the Falcon. Now, the Falcon was slightly less luxurious and it was a bit slower than the Gulfstream. So the plan was for Haggler to fly the Gulfstream. He was going to fly the Gulfstream west of the country. And then the Falcon, where Hearns was going to be in, he was going to fly to the east. And then what was going to happen was both of them would eventually meet at Las Vegas. So once they arrive at Las Vegas, both planes land, they switch. So Hearns goes in the Gulfstream, and then obviously Haggler decides, he jumps on the Falcon. Now, the trouble was when the plane reached Vegas, Pat Petronelli told Bob Arum that Haggler has no interest whatsoever of flying in the Falcon. He was quite happy with their more luxurious plane. And he said, if you tell me I need to go on the Falcon, then basically I'm going home. Now, when Hearns found out that this was the case, he hit the roof, he was absolutely pissed. He was miffed off. He was basically threatening to say, I'm going home as well. So, both having a bit of a hissy fit about it. So in the end, Bob Arum, he saved the day by leasing another plane. Now, what he did was he leased an identical G2 Gulfstream jet with equal features, so they could resume the tour. So they had this stupid little hissy fit between the pair of them, but in the end they both had the same jets, and then they continued the tour. And it was, as you say, during the tour where Hearns repeatedly disrespected Haggler, engaging in constant trash talk, which basically pissed Haggler off. And even Emmanuel Stewart turned around and said it's completely out of character of Tommy to be doing this, but it was just business to promote the fight. And yeah, so Haggler was getting rather irritated with Hearns, and in his own words, he said, the tour did me good because it pissed him off and he lost respect for Tommy. Therefore, one thing about Haggler, he liked to want to hate somebody because it helped him get into the ring. And obviously it was all nicey-nicey, $5 million each, happy days. Then with this tour and Hearns chatting shit, it just riled Haggler up, and he had no respect for him during the tour, and he was ready to go to war.
This rivalry has been brewing for 3 years. Haggler saw Hearns in his future as far back as 1982. They were scheduled to meet, but a Hearns hand injury intervened.
I'm not going in there for injury. And when I go in there, I want to be in tip-top condition and great health.
Finally, the fight was canceled. Haggler was livid.
And he was going to make $2 million. He turned down $2 million. In the first beginning, Ray, he started complaining about his little baby Pinky. You know how many people will give $1 million for that little baby Pinky? They cut that thing off.
And come April 15, in 3 rounds, I will be the greatest.
And Tommy said, I'm going to be laying down there and his hands are going to be raised. I feel almost the same way, but when the smoke clears, because I'm coming out smoking, as you know, but when the smoke clears, it'll be my hands that be raised.
Well, it was interesting because that motivation was exactly what he needed. Hearns basically trash talking to sell the fight is exactly what he needed. Now, I think what really annoyed Marvin Hagler was the fact that obviously Haggler went 15 rounds with Duran and Tommy Hearns blasted him out in 1984, and that was what Tommy Hearns was selling it on the basis of like, you know, look what I did to Duran against what you struggled with against Duran. And that is exactly what he needed. That was the fuel to the fire for Marvin Hagler, because that put him into that war perspective. Basically, he went out there and said, I'm going to do to him what I did to Alan Minter in 1980, which was destroy him. So this was setting the tone of what was going to be an unbelievable fight, of course. And another story that we've got here is Hagler and Hearns were actually due to meet for the last time in New York, where the Sports Illustrated magazine would shoot for the cover photo for its Fight Week issue. Now, Hagler had to pull out due to picking up a code on the tour, but Hearns was ready to make his way after picking up the 1984 Fighter of the Year award at a WBC dinner. So Hearns builds the 767, which is again another jet, but due to the mechanical trouble, it had to return to the gate. So when it finally took off, one of the two engines actually caught fire. So it ended up forcing an emergency landing. So they ended up landing at Salt Lake City, and I've been on planes. I've been on planes before, and I'm not the best for flying myself. And even a little bit of turbulence gets me going, to be honest with you, holding onto my seats for dear life. I can't even imagine what Tommy Hearns was going through when one of the engines caught fire. You must have been like, yeah, this is the end for me now. This is the end for me now. So it affected him so much so that there was even talk of the fight being completely moved because of the fact that he wouldn't get on a plane. And they was talking about they may have to even move the fight to Salt Lake City after all that. So it was absolutely crazy that in the build-up to all this happened. And this was something, like I said earlier at the start of the episode, I never even knew that had happened. So it was a great little story to come upon that. Even during the press tour, there was trials and there was tribulations, which was leading into a nice, interesting fight. Let's move on then and let's look at more parts of the build-up, because as we were talking about earlier on, the build-up is what essentially made this fight what it was, and it was about them two delivering in the ring on the night, of course. Now, in the build-up for it, for Tommy Hearns, he'd only actually ever faced one southpaw in his professional career to date before the Hagler fight. So Manny Stewart, he had to bring in left-handed fighters, so he brought in a left-handed trio of Cecil Pettigrew, Brian Muller and Charles Henderson to basically have him fight ready for Hagler, who was a southpaw. So that was only one southpaw that he'd ever faced throughout his career, and obviously going into this fight, it was a lot of experience that he'd always had against orthodox fighters. And you look at his career going into the fight, he'd had 41 fights going into the Hagler fight. 41 fights, and he'd faced 40 orthodox fighters and only one southpaw fighter. So, yeah, it was the right move, of course, from the legendary Manny Stewart to certainly get southpaw fighters in his sparring to help him prepare for what was going to be a ferocious Marvin Hagler.
Yeah, it was, and obviously Emmanuel Stewart did allude to the fact that, you know, although Hagler, he was a right-hander. He actually he switched his stance. He felt more comfortable in the southpaw stance, which is something we did discuss in when we done his career profile. But so he's a bit of a switch here. So that's the difficulty as well. Although Hearns, as you say, many of orthodox, you know, sometimes just having a fighter having that southpaw stance and then switching and leading with the other hand, it's going to be really confusing. That was one thing that Emmanuel Stewart said he couldn't do. You know, it was tricky. You know, you have a left. I think what he did do is he'd throw a southpaw in and then just throw an orthodox fighter in the next round. He was mixing it up a bit, just trying to keep Hearns guessing, you know, and not knowing what was coming next, kind of thing. So, yeah, that was the ideology of it. And Hagler, in his side, he brought in actually Donald Curry, where he actually trained at Palm Springs in a luxurious 5-star hotel. I think it was to do with his cold. I think the Petronellis decided to stay there because he had this flu, and with the hot weather, it's going to help him. So they brought in Donald Curry, and Donald Curry was a 5'9" welterweight champion at the time, WBA and IBF titles. And it was in basic preparation for Hearns, you know, being such a tall guy at the weight. And no doubt, you know, although Hagler being the bigger guy in terms of fighting at middleweight, Hearns, although he fought for the lower divisions, he was tall. He was 4 inches taller than Hagler. So, but the one thing that Hagler did do is, I think when they arrived in Vegas, they decided to move off to Taco's ringside gym. So it was a bit away from all the glitter and the lights of Vegas, whereas Hearns sort of stuck around. He quite liked that and had his massive entourage, so he quite enjoyed it. But Hagler, he said he wanted to move away and go to a smaller gym just to get the smell of a gym. And he quoted this great quote, actually. He says, after Palm Springs, I needed to get used to the smell of a gym again. It's not that we had any secrets. It's just that we were trying to get down to the serious business. Over at Caesars, every time you fight, it winds up on television. And when the corners are trying to tell you something, there's a microphone stuck in your face. So in his eyes, he's sort of thinking, well, look, let's get away from it. Let's get grounded. Let's get back down to earth before we go there on the night into the main Caesars hotel. So, yeah, that was his ideology, and he felt that it get him more ready for it. And the other thing, which was really, really strange, was Hearns actually held the WBC Super Welterweight title. Now, he obviously moved up. I think he had fought at middleweight, but it wasn't for a title, I don't believe. He may have fought to defend his title. I can't quite remember. But either way, Jose Sullivan initially threatened to strip Hearns of his title if he fought Haggler instead of John McGarvey, who was the other number one contender. Now, Hearns was later granted this position, provided that Haggler and Hearns fight is scheduled for 12 rounds and not 15. So rather than sort of face yet another delay like they had in 1982, they reluctantly accepted. So that's why this fight is 12 rounds and not 15, because of Jose Sullivan.
We'll go on to another part then of the build-up, and we go into the judges. So there was a bit of an argument prior to the fight taking place due to the fact that when the judges were announced, we had Reynolds Herb Santos, Englishman Harry Gibbs, and Rudy Ortega of Los Angeles. Pat Petronelli objected to Ortega, stating that he might favour Hearns, basically. And what happened eventually was that they go for a third judge that was switched to Dick Young. What was interesting about that was even Bob Arum got involved in this particular incident. Even he decided to put his 10 pence in by saying, I don't want to see them try and steal it from Marvin. So during the press conferences then, in the final week, this is where Hearns starts to get his final little jibes in against Marvin Hagler. Bearing in mind, they'd been on press conference after press conference, city after city, country after country. We get to fight week, we get to the final press conference, and Tommy Hearns, he's still at it. He's still cracking on. And in this particular final press conference, he decides, I'm going to get more insulting on Marvin Hagler. I'm deciding I'm going to call him a midget in this one. I decided, because of the fact that he was 4 inches taller, we was going to use the fact that he was taller and basically mock him because he's a smaller guy, which in terms of how insults go, I don't think that is a great insult, to be honest with you. I'm pretty sure there could have been some more war of the words in there, but obviously Hagler weren't going to let this go down the way it went down, and he decided to come back, and he basically said, Tommy Hearns, he ought to be playing basketball instead of fighting me. He was a lanky, gangly fighter. We've talked about him. We've talked about how he isn't a natural. You wouldn't have seen him in the welterweight division. He was very big, very tall for a welterweight, and he was a gangly fighter, and he did look like a basketball player. So let's have it right. Marvin Hagler was totally right on that one. So that's it. Let's move into the final bit of the build-up before we move in to the fight itself.
So pretty much, I mean, the weigh-in was all the talking had been done. There was no more talking to be done. They literally just shared the glances at the weigh-in. Nothing was really said. And it wasn't until the night where there was problems started to arise, and it was Emmanuel Stewart actually. He was in the dressing room wrapping up Hearns' hands, and it was I believe it's Billy Hearns, who's Tommy Hearns' brother, ended up having an altercation with one of the security guards. It ended up turning into a massive fight. So actually Emmanuel Stewart only half wrapped Hearns' hands, which is interesting considering how the fight goes. So that was the first bit. And then the other bit is when they made their entrances and they got into the ring, and Haggler sort of standing there and he's doing his shadow boxing, and Billy Hearns, obviously probably reared up from the argument he's just had, is starting to taunt Haggler from across the ring. Now, seemingly oblivious to Marvin, who continued to just sort of shadow box. But it was later on that Haggler actually said, yeah, I see him. I was thinking, right then, all you're going to do is get your brother's ass kicked. So it was all ready, and it was, Haggler was just on a mission this night. And for me, the one thing about Haggler is just from the instance going back to a gym, getting the smells of the gym back, getting his head out of the clouds after being in Palm Springs, and he was ready, and he was literally the cap he wore the whole tour with war across it. That was Haggler's mindset. Whereas I believe Hearns may have been a little bit more away with the fairies. As he said, he was walking on the Duran cloud after what he'd done to Duran in 2 rounds, and he's going to put it right. Albeit they both showed unbelievable courage, and it is a massive, just massive, excellent fight. You know, I just believe that Haggler probably had the ball by the horns, if you like, and he was ready to go to war.
Well, I think one of the facts that came out after the fight, but was significant in my eyes for the fight itself and the way the fight went down, was the retrospective talk of Tommy Hearns decided to have this massage before the fight, which Manny Stewart was totally against, and Manny Stewart totally believed was a big factor on fight night. So he decides, out of character and something he didn't normally do in his pre-fight ritual, was he decided to have a sports massage, which Manny Stewart basically felt weakened legs. And when they talk about women and they talk about having no sex before fights, and they talk about the same sort of effect of the relaxation and how it relaxes the muscles, and how essentially it doesn't sort of put them into the sort of tension that they need to be in, you know, the fear factor of a fight, and be more sharp and agile on the night. Essentially, he received a massage before the fight, and that was part of the reason, arguably, why Manny Stewart feels he went out there and decided to go gung-ho in the fight, which is what we're going to move into, of course. Now, the fight itself, one of the greatest short fights you'll ever watch in boxing. Absolutely unbelievable, and it's an absolute pleasure to have watched this fight back over and over and over again. And I can't really give justice to sort of how good of the fight this is for just only 8 minutes of a fight. So let's move into it. The first round then.
Staring at each other through the national anthem. To stare down, of course, so customary before these fights. And here we go. Round 1. Haggler, right off the bat, attempting to get inside. He'd love to be able to pin Hearns on the ropes if he can.
A more aggressive start by Haggler. Look at him, right for the body. Marvin Hagler only wants the body, and he bangs Marvin. Oh, Hearns may have hurt him with a right hand.
Hearns another right. Hearns hits him with an uppercut. Haggler, he's hurt. Haggler is done. Hearns got inside. Hit him with a right uppercut. Marvin ties him up.
Marvin Hagler is still hurt.
So it was Haggler coming out like a bull, and a good left by Haggler. But Hearns didn't flinch. Marvin going for the body. Wild first round.
That first round is probably the best first round of a fight you'll ever see, and the only other one I can say that maybe comes somewhere near that is the first Manny Pacquiao Juan Marquez fight.
Yeah, I mean, even then, I mean, the thing is with this fight in particular is that the first round especially is they always seem to try and compare them with any other fights. If any fight goes to war early, the first things you'll hear a commentator say is, "Oh, this is like Hagler Hearns is," and that just says everything you need to know about. I mean, even Richard Steele refereed the fight. He said, "I've been refereeing for 15 years, and I don't think I've seen that much intensity in a fight before." And we all know Richard Steele is, he's a legendary referee, and he's been there, seen it, done it. So this first round was just, I mean, they both just come at each other like a train. It was an even battle. That will always go down as one of the best rounds of championship boxing ever, if not the best. And it was just mesmerising action, literally from both. And they burst out of their corners, their retrospective corners, and they just went to war. Hearns was sort of throwing right hands at Haggler, but the champ would sort of put his head down and he'd march forward. And Tommy was shooting rights, and Haggler was basically popping off the jab, throwing hooks from his southpaw stance. So it was just constantly relentless. They were throwing so many shots at each other. Everybody that was watching the fight was in awe. I mean, as I say, I watched it later on in my life, and obviously probably about 10 years after, if not a bit longer, and I was just amazed by it. And Hearns he does actually rock Haggler a little bit, I felt, when he sort of threw a right-handed uppercut. But Haggler sort of just, he just walked forward. That's just what he did. He nothing really seemed to faze him. He had his head down and he was ready to go. And that was the one shot that I felt that Hearns may have hurt him with. Now, I'm not quite sure if that was the right hand that actually opened up the cut, but then a deep cut did open up on Hagler's forehead. It was savage, really, from both of us. But I mean, this cut was quite bad as well. I think it wasn't much left of the round either. So the cut was open quite badly as they sort of trotted off back to their corners. But what a ferocious first round that was! It was just unreal. I've never seen anything like it. And even still to this day, I don't think I ever will. It was just unreal. It really was unbelievable.
And also, after the end of that first round, Tommy Hearns actually broke his hand during the exchanges of the first round. And again, something that weren't known at the time of the fight taking place, but again was found out in the aftermath of the particular fight. So all the bombs that he was landing and catching Haggler with, and the one that he rocked him with, as you talked about in that fight, he actually ended up breaking his hand. So he had to go out there in the second round, and it was just more of the same, really. I think in the second round, when you watch it back, when I was talking about the fact that he'd had this massage prior to the fight on the night, he come out and he's looking a little bit rubbery-legged at this point. And I think it's Sugar Ray Leonard who actually says he doesn't like the way Tommy's moving. He looks a little bit rubbery-legged. Even Hearns has even gone on to comment later on down the line that he even felt himself his legs were gone at this point in the second round. But he come out, he was a bit more cautious, but Haggler started to experiment a little bit, and he decided to switch to orthodox for a few moments. So it slowed down a little bit, but not over the top. It led us in to the third and final round, which is the round where the fight ended, and we got one of the most legendary nights we've ever seen in boxing.
Tremendous right. Hearns appears rubbery. He appeared that way in the second round.
You know, Richard Steele is breaking these fighters very quickly. That's uncharacteristic of him. It's hurting Haggler because he wants to work inside. Hearns is smiling, but he's taking shots.
Another right hand. Hearns turns his back, takes another right. Hearns in deep trouble again. Hearns is down. Hearns is down in the third round and on his back. And he's not going to beat the count. I don't believe. Tommy Hearns tries to get up, and
they've got to stop this fight.
Does he get up? He just doesn't know. He can't continue. It's Haggler, full of blood. Blood, no doubt, impeding his vision, stopping him in the third round after Hearns almost ended it on a first-round knockout. It didn't go very far, but it was a beauty.
Yeah, I mean, you say that with a break as well. When sort of Hearns did return to his corner, I think when you watch the fight, is the cameras obviously are more interested in Haggler's cut and how bad it is, and with him being bald, it obviously looks worse than it is. It was a bad cut, don't get me wrong, but the good thing about it was bang in the middle of the forehead, so it's sort of going in between the eyes. So, you know, the severity of the cut was what everybody wanted to know about, whereas unbeknownst to everybody else was that Hearns obviously was in the corner, and he actually, when he sat down, he actually said the words to Emmanuel Stewart, "My hand is broke." Stewart sort of replied, "What do you mean? Is it sore?" And Hearns says, "No, it's broke." So he knew. And then obviously, as you say, in that second round, he came out. He tried to be a little bit more cautious by throwing the sort of keeping the distance and throwing the jab out. And he retreated quite a few times when Haggler sort of forced him back. And Haggler was cutting the ring off really well, and he was throwing some great shots. His jab was finding the mark more repeatedly, and he was, as I say, he was cutting off the ring really well. And it was right towards the end of that round where Haggler had Hearns trapped against the ropes, and just before the bell, Haggler lands a right-left combo, and then followed by a right hook, and Hearns was wobbled, and then literally not long after the bell sounded. So going back to that third round, and obviously straight away, Petronelli Goody is straight on the cut, and he's just cleaning it up, and the doctors are having a little look. And then they start the third round, which still allows them to start, I think, probably about 30 seconds, if not a minute, probably less. The fight gets stalled, and it's Richard Steele asks the doctors to sort of come in and have a look, and the doctor does say to Marvin, "Can you see all right?" And Haggler's response was, "Sure, I can see fine. I ain't missing him, am I?" So Haggler he didn't give a crap about what was wrong with his cut. He just wanted to literally take Hearns' head off, and boy did he do that.
He certainly did, and the ringside physician actually looked at that cut in that stoppage and basically told the referee, Richard Steele, that no, the cut's naturally not bothering him, let him go. So that's how the fight ended up continuing, which in different scenarios that may have been stopped and we may have never got this fight, but fortunately for us we got an amazing fight and we got an amazing end to the fight, because obviously, you know, Tommy's spent at this point in time. You can kind of see it watching the fight back that he's ready to go. He's ready to go, and obviously that's what Marvin Hagler did. He absolutely landed a ferocious right hand over the top, which he caught. I think it looked more like it was on the temple from different angles, but he caught him in the sweet spot. And then you see sort of Tommy's legs go from underneath him, and he ends up falling forward and goes down. and he's trying to get up, and he's trying to get up, and he just about manages to get up at 9, but it's just not enough. The referee gets to 10, and he's not, you know, he's not fully ready to go. And that's where the referee obviously steps in, and that's it. He's gone. At the end of the day, it's over. It's over. And ironically, Sugar Ray Leonard's doing the commentary as well, and you can hear him yelling into the microphone at the time. He's gone. He's gone. And that's it. It's just an amazing end to what was an amazing fight.
Yeah, it really was. And that one thing I noticed is just before, sort of, when Hagler's in the complete ascendancy, and then he catches Hearns. I think it's like a right hand, and you see Hearns sort of he goes from one side of the ring to the other, and he's sort of dazed and he's wobbling away, and it's just an iconic shot for me when you see him sort of on them wobbly legs, sort of sliding across the ring and just wobbling about, and then he sort of looks round, and I think he thinks, and he says this little snide, little smirk in his face, as if to say, like, he's got away, and as if to say that I'm not hurt, and then because he was still obviously dazed, Hagler's gone chasing after him from one side of the ring to the other, and that's when, as he sort of turns round, Hagler's throwing that right hand. He throws 2 massive right hands, and when that first one connects, I mean, it hurts him. The second one flattens him. I mean, he's on his back, he's looking up at the lights, and again, another iconic shot of Tommy Hearns on the floor, completely out. As you say, credit to the guy. I mean, what courage he must have had. Broken hand, busted up, you know, manages to get to his feet, and then in the end, I think Richard Steele even said that it wasn't. He knew he was going to call it a day, but then he realised that he's actually holding Tommy up, and then he just sort of laid him down. And then again, you have this weird situation where one of his entourage is actually carrying him like a baby, and then that was one of the that was one of the pictures that was sort of everybody took, and it was spattered across all the newspapers the next morning. So Tommy, to his credit as well, I mean, the other thing was the broken hand situation. He never told anybody about that broken hand, to the point where he didn't even see a doctor while he was in Vegas. He didn't actually see a doctor until he got back to Detroit. And Emmanuel Stewart said the reason why he didn't do that was because he didn't want anyone else to get wind of the fact that he broke his hand, because he didn't want to discredit Hagler's win. And that just shows you the type of guy that Tommy was. And he was very nice after. I mean, we spoke about all the bullshit trash talk he put in at Hagler during the tour, and Hagler obviously getting really pissed off with it, and he felt that it was disrespectful. But, you know, the respect was clear to see after the fight. They both respected each other. Apart from the one line where Hagler sort of said, I told you I'll eat him up like Pac-Man. I thought that was a great quote.
Yeah.
Marvin, you took the action to Tommy right away. You went right for his body. He looked like he stunned you momentarily with the right in the first. Did that right hurt you?
It didn't bother me, just made me madder.
Okay.
I told you I was going to eat him up like Pac-Man. I figured once I get through the right hand, then it was all mine, you know, because I think the first big one, what you tried, tried to put me away out there, and I think that's when I got the cut there, but I wanted to show the world I am the greatest now.
Well, you are the greatest middleweight. There's no doubt about that.
Did I say 3?
You went right for the body. Was that your plan immediately?
That was the way we planned. I want to thank all my sparring partners. Especially I want to thank God for giving me the strength and the courage and the confidence to go in here and to know that I was the one. I was the champion, but I had to fight like a challenger.
That fight, I think, took tremendous courage on your part for this reason. You walked right in against the cannon. You were willing to take the right hand to knock him out.
You got it. I figured I had to take punches or to give some, but I told you he was going to get some too.
This was, in some ways, not like the Marvin Hagler we've often seen. Not the ring technician. You bombed.
That's it. That's what I felt. I felt as though with every one of my fights I've been fighting, I improved, and I put it all together in this fight.
The Petronelli's here. I guess you've got to be just thrilled with this. Probably your biggest moment.
The greatest. There's this guy. Does he? Now that we take care of the wise guys, the hurt man, the hit man. We love him.
I want to say to all the people out there who spent their money, I hope that you got your money's worth, because Tommy's a hell of a fighter, and I think I put all my all out here. But the better man won tonight.
Well, you look at Hearns then, and Hearns, looking back on this particular fight and an interview he did a couple of years ago, this is what he had to say. It was one of the shortest yet most exciting fights most people had ever seen, but it was 3 rounds I just want to forget. In my opinion, both of us had drained ourselves to make the weight, but as soon as the bell rung, we just ran out of the corner. I was thinking to myself, look at this fool, what's wrong with him? Something has made him mad. I knew it wouldn't be long before someone was out of there. I punched him again and again as hard as I could, and then just wondered how on earth he was taking these shots. I hit him with everything I had. It was unreal. He was a freak. He just kept coming. I'm not a quitter, but I think I lost heart. All I could think to do was keep popping him as he came forward, and then he got me. It only ever takes one punch to change things, and that's what happened to me. That's always the danger.
Well, for me, I mean, Hearns, he came out of that first round like he wanted to end it. The punches he was literally throwing, they were all massive bombs. And I've got a little, that's what I've got in front of me. So a combined total of 339 punches in just 8 minutes of boxing landed in that fight. 339 punches were thrown between a pair of them. 96 of 173 Haggler landed, and Hearns landed 94 of 166, and that's just 8 minutes of boxing. So that's unreal, unbelievable, and you know, it's just, it makes this fight so magnificent. It really is a stunning fight, and one that, as I say, it's just, all knowledgeable experts have described it as the greatest short fight in boxing history, and I can't. There's no more you can really say, really. It was just brilliant, and one of the best boxing fights in the latter half of the 20th century.
This, for Haggler, was his 10th knockout in 11 successful defences, and it's, for a lot of fans and a lot of journalists alike, it's regarded as the pinnacle achievement in his career, because it cemented his legacy as one of the greatest middleweights of all time as well. And remember, we've spoke about this on the Career Profiles episode of Marvin Hagler, about where we rate him as one of the greatest middleweights, in some people's eyes, the greatest middleweight. So this was a crowning achievement for him, and we'll obviously touch on the aftermath for both men in a few moments. But in terms of the fight itself then, the Ring magazine named this fight the Fight of the Year for 1985, and round one was named Round of the Year. So for me, that kind of put it into perspective, that even though it was a very short fight, only 8 minutes, it was actually voted the best fight of that year, and round one was voted the best round of the year as well. And in fact, it's probably there in, if he was going to do a top 10 of the best rounds of the best fights of all time, it's going to be up there, certainly going to be up there. I mean, the Legendary Night series has brought us Corrales versus Castillo, it's brought us Roberto Duran versus Sugar Ray Leonard, it's brought us some of the greatest fights in this series that we run, and some of them are certainly up there, and Marvin Hagler and Tommy Hearns is certainly another one that is definitely up there in that top 10 of rounds of fights. So the aftermath for both men then Johnston. Well, let's look at Tommy Hearns first, because obviously, you know, we've done a full career profile on him. So if you want to listen to a bit more of a deep dive into that career, again, go and check it out on the Career Profiles feed. But in the immediate aftermath for Tommy Hearns, obviously this was a crushing defeat for him, and something that I didn't think about, you know, when looking at this fight and looking at Tommy Hearns' career in hindsight, is actually that Tommy Hearns had 2 mega fights in his career. That was Sugar Ray Leonard and Marvin Hagler, and yet he lost them both. But because of what else he did in his career, he's still regarded as one of the greatest fighters of all time. But when you put it like that, he lost to 2 of the other greatest fighters of all time as well. So it depends on how you want to look at it. You know, how much of a crushing loss was this? Because he would go on to win world titles in other weights after this as well. But in the immediate aftermath for him, it was a big loss. And obviously after this particular fight, he'd nearly spend a year out of the ring. Yeah,
and what you say is right. It's funny, isn't it? You know, losing to Haggler and losing to Leonard, and they are the 2 big marquee fights, and they helped cement Leonard and Hagler's legacy, really, as 2 of the greatest of their era and of all time. So Hearns pretty much come up short. But I suppose the other guy was Roberto Duran, and he got rid of him in 2, which is something nobody had ever done. Which, you know, the career profiles come from the fact that he is voted as the greatest light middleweight, and I think, or junior middleweight, whatever you want to call it. You know, I think that is pretty much what Hearns was about for me. I think he could have stuck around a little bit longer in that division, and he could have really got on to cement his legacy in that division. But Hagler's fight was big money for him, wasn't it? He's got to move up to the middleweight division, and he's going to fight the biggest name he can, and that is one thing about Tommy Hearns. You can't knock it, and And when we talk about Roberto Duran, you talk about him as a lightweight. So, you know, he sort of has that before. And Hearns, I think, it's sort of after these two fights. So obviously, he does fight Leonard as well. He also wins a third world title at light heavyweight. You know, he wins a fourth world title at middleweight, eventually wins that WBC middleweight against Roldan, and then actually goes on to win a fifth world title as well at super middleweight. So, you know, he became the first to ever hold, you know, to be a 4-weight world champion in 1987, and then a 5-weight world champion in 1988. So, in that respect, you know, I think his career, it progressed, actually got better. You know, he ended up with the draw as well with Sugar Ray Leonard, which still he should have won that fight, albeit they weren't at their peak. But, you know, it's still a name that I believe he should have had on his record. But even still, you know, Hearns, putting this fight in perspective, just in general, I mean, I would say Castillo and Corrales is my favourite fight ever. But then Gatti Ward as well. But this is up there. This is 100% in the top 5. And Hearns' career, as you say, he fell short against the top guys, but he did manage to go on to be a 5-weight world champion.
So Hagler's aftermath then of his career would only last 2 more fights, because he would go in and have an absolute war of attrition against John the Beast Mugabe, and then he would have his mega fight, the super fight against Sugar Ray Leonard, which is another Legendary Nights episode which we have already covered, so go and listen to that if you've not already listened to it. We've got them 2 fights that finished his career, and although he had that loss and retired after Sugar Ray Leonard and losing on a controversial split decision, his career and his legacy was already cemented at this point. And it's this fight and it's this legendary night with Tommy Hearns that really did cement his legacy of one of the greatest middleweights of all time. And people may argue, yeah, but he was facing a guy who had come up from light middleweight. But this was a guy, as we just said then, rightly so, went on to actually win titles in higher weights. So it's whichever way you want to look at it. Was this the career-defining night for Marvin Hagler? I certainly think so. I certainly think this is the one that cemented his legacy, and this is a fight we wouldn't be talking about, 35 years even after the fact it happened, because of how good of a fight it was, and this was a really enjoyable, legendary night to cover.
Absolutely, and Hagler, again, I mean, I think you're right. I think this was a defining night for him, and he even said in the ring after, when he was getting interviewed, and he did say, you know, people kept sort of saying to him that, you know, he hasn't quite had that big fight yet, and he's a good fighter, a great fighter, if you like, but he's not one of the greatest, and he was quick to say, look, come on, you've got to give me credit now, what I've just done to Tommy Hearns, and people do, and you know, I can't, for me, he is, I really don't know, I think him and Carlos Monzon are my 2 best middleweights to have ever fought, and he was close to catching Carlos Monzon in terms of his, I think it was the Sugar Ray fight. I think he needed to win that to draw equal with Monzon's record of defences, and unfortunately he come up short in, as you say, a legendary night we've done, so go and listen to that. But an excellent fight. I mean, as I say, I probably would have this around, crazy enough to say, probably about my 3rd or 4th best fight, but for me, Castillo and Corrales is still my number 1. But even still, this happened in 1985, for goodness sake, and my goodness me, what a fight.
It certainly was. So, if you've enjoyed listening to this legendary night, the tale of Marvin Hagler versus Tommy Hearns, then please go and check us out on Apple Podcasts or any other available podcasting app out there like Spotify. You can even check us out on our YouTube channel as well and do it on there. But the Legendary Nights podcast has its own feed on Twitter. You can go and follow us at Legend Night Pod on Twitter to go and check out all the latest episodes of the Legendary Nights series. If you've not already subscribed to any of the other series we've got, which is Career Profiles, Ones to Watch, and the main BTR Boxing podcast feed, you can go and do that by checking them out all on Apple Podcasts and any other available podcasting app out there. So, as always, thank you very much for listening to the Legendary Nights series. We hope you've enjoyed the tale of Marvin Hagler versus Tommy Hearns.
And right now, Thomas Hearns is an open book for Ray Leonard. Backs up against the ropes.
This is one of the most unusual calls by a referee in the history of the sport.
The first loss. A tremendous victory.